Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Alican Ayanlar. Ties between Israel and Turkey have been on the up after both countries reestablished official relations in 2016 following a 6-year freeze. But after a series of disputes, including the U.S.'s decision to move its embassy to Jerusalem and Israel's crackdown on protesters in Gaza that left more than 100 dead, relations have soured. The latest spat involved Ebru Özkan, a Turkish national who was arrested in Israel in June on charges of supporting terrorism. After being released, she came home to a hero's welcome. Her detention was part of several highly publicized arrests of Turkish nationals in Israel, many who were visiting Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque. Israeli media has also reported that the country's National Security Council has drafted possible measures to be taken against Turkey's national aid agency, TİKA, which operates in the occupied territories. The report says Israel accuses the aid group of transferring funds to Hamas and purchasing property on behalf of Turkey. Earlier this week, Israel sentenced a Palestinian man working for TİKA in Gaza to 9 years in prison on charges of aiding Hamas. So, are claims of rising Turkish influence in the Holy Land grounded in reality? And is Israel buying into this notion when it comes to its relations with Turkey? To discuss this, joining me now is Alon Liad, who is a former Israeli ambassador, and journalist Selim Atalay. Gentlemen, welcome to the both of you. Selim, let me start with you. Sure. The allegations are that the Turkish institutions are buying up property in East Jerusalem. Turks are being sort of motivated to stage protests outside of Al-Aqsa Mosque, and that some Turkish organizations are funneling money into Hamas. How much of it is the reality?
In a broader sense, we're talking about Turkey's interest in Jerusalem, which is not a new thing. Turkish interest on Jerusalem had been, last I counted, was a few hundred years. So, and last proper arrangement that had set up the status of Jerusalem vis-a-vis the major religions was conducted by and arranged by the Ottoman Sultan. Now, since then, has been deterioration big time. The latest situation, again, Turkey's interest is not new. Maybe there's a little more traffic nowadays because Turkish Airlines flies there, but Turkish media might be a little more interested in what's happening in Jerusalem and stuff. But that interest will continue. It's not new, and I don't think it's doing anything major to the status quo.
Mr. Ambassador, Selim says the interests aren't new, but are these latest allegations sort of a legitimate concern for Israel? Are they a thorn in its side?
It's definitely the most sensitive nerve on the Israeli conflict between us and the Palestinians and between us and the Arab world. And these allegations, and we have no idea about the scope, but it appears in the media quite often, are causing a lot of anger because Israel is doing exactly the opposite. Israel is trying to strengthen the Jewish presence in Jerusalem and also in East Jerusalem. And the accusation is that Turkey is trying to do exactly the opposite, to weaken the Jewish presence, especially in East Jerusalem and especially around the holy places. So definitely this is causing a lot of anger with the Israeli government.
I want to pull up an article now. This was an article that was published in Haaretz, an Israeli newspaper. And in there it said that Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the Palestinian Authority have all warned Israel over the past year about growing Turkish activity in East Jerusalem. They claim that it is a part or an attempt by Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan to claim ownership over the Jerusalem issue. Selim, let me start with you. What struck me here is that you actually, it does seem bizarre at first glance to have predominantly Muslim countries like Jordan and Saudi Arabia to go and complain to Israel. What's the logic behind this?
Yeah, exactly. Just there were two ironic points in that headline. One was, yes, Saudi and Jordan are complaining about what Turkey is doing or not. And the second part seems that Israel was not aware of what's going on. So two ironic elements. Well, welcome to the new Middle East, a new division of parties. Just we see increasing grouping with Saudi, Egypt, some Gulf Arab states alongside Israel. They seem to have one permanent enemy, which is adversary, which is Iran, and some are very much keen on adding Turkey to that line, to the other side of the line too, and it must be because of that. And probably Jordan is a little more shaky here because Jordan is being seriously questioned on what they have done until now to protect the Islamic sites in Jerusalem, because ostensibly Jordan was in charge of these places, and we can't say they have done a good job until now.
Alon, you're a former diplomat, so this may not be the best way to put it towards you, but is there a bit of logic in the sense that my enemy's enemy is my friend? That's why these countries are sort of maybe approaching Israel here?
Part of it, but not the whole picture. First of all, it's amazing that for the first 30 or 35 years of Israel, we had two friends in the Muslim world, Iran and Turkey. And in a way, we lost both, in a way. The new friendship, especially with Egypt and Jordan, is built on their urgent security needs. Urgent. Israel is giving them a kind of a security umbrella, especially for the Sinai and for North Jordan. And the friendship could even be defined as a security alliance. So a lot of what they do regionally is coordinated with Israel. Now, the Saudi picture is different. First of all, Saudi is new on board regarding the kind of positive attitude to Israel. A lot of it came with Trump, with a change in America. But there, you're correct about the enemy of my enemy, because their concern is mostly Iran, and Iran is our biggest enemy.
Selim, are we seeing sort of Turkey's sort of push in the Holy Land just a piece in a larger puzzle, with President Erdogan trying to be the voice of the oppressed Muslims in the world?
Again, it's for President Erdogan, seems like a historic obligation to follow. And also, again, if not Turkey, then who is the question? The so-called supporters of the Palestinian cause or Palestinian issue are nowhere to be seen. Egypt, Saudi, Jordan are all in disarray. So who's going to, and also to leave political concerns aside, the humanitarian side, I think Turkey's approach basically can even be considered as humanitarian, because what's happening in Gaza, what's happening in the West Bank, Turkey's main concern is basically to stop the killing first.
Mr. Ambassador, you're very well of the relations between Turkey and Israel. Behind the scenes, they share very deep economic and military ties. We've seen relations go up and down. Currently, there are no ambassadors in the country. Is this perhaps maybe a first step that the two sides can start in terms of normalization of relations?
Yeah. When I compare to the two downgradings, this time we didn't have a downgrading. Ambassadors were pulled and consul generals were expelled, but no downgrading. This time there is a base that we can build on. We have trade, quite a wide scope, and Turkish Airlines is flying 10 times a day. I flew yesterday night, the planes are full, and the people, the Turkish people and the Israeli people know each other from years of tourism, so we have something to build on. The collapse is on the political level, on the strategic. That strategic dialogue is gone, and it will be very difficult to renew the strategic dialogue if the ambassadors are at home. Our ambassador in Tel Aviv and your ambassador sitting in Istanbul or in Ankara. And I think as the first step, if we want to recover, we have to find a formula to bring them back. It's very difficult for each country to do the first move, but we need a third party, maybe Vladimir Putin, a phone call to Netanyahu and a phone call to President Erdogan, and maybe he can solve it now.
An interesting point. Mr. Massad didn't mention Donald Trump. He said Vladimir Putin. That's an interesting point.
I don't think Trump can do it with his leverage on Turkey.
Yeah.
Okay, it's a complicated issue. I'm sorry we're going to have to keep it there because we're just running out of time. And thank you for shedding some light, Sidi Matalai and Ambassador Alon. Thank you very much for joining us here on Straight Talk.
Thank you very much.
It's been a rough year for the lira and the Turkish economy in general, despite logging a 7.4% growth rate in 2017. So why are international markets and investors so jittery about Turkey's economic prospects? Are they betting against the country due to their dislike of the government rather than its economic policies? We'll try and answer this question with our panel of experts. But first, let's have a look at a timeline of the lira's slide by Ömer Kablan.
The Turkish currency has been declining sharply against the US dollar. But to understand how it got to this point, you need to go back to 2001. Back then, Turkey was in an economic crisis. Coalition governments throughout the 1990s caused political instability and were unable to manage the economy. Then in 2002, the socially conservative and economically liberal Justice and Development Party, or AK Party, won the election, inheriting the economic turmoil. Between 2002 and 2007, economic growth averaged 7.2% a year, making Turkey a star performer in an otherwise difficult region. In 2009, the Turkish lira was strong against the dollar. $1 was equivalent to 1.47 liras. But by mid-2013, crisis after crisis ensued, and the lira started to depreciate. In late 2013, the AK Party government experienced what it called a judicial coup attempt. The government said a parallel state created by the Fethullah terrorist organization, or FETÖ, had controlled factions of the judiciary, military, and police. It also accuses FETÖ of planning the 2016 coup attempt in Turkey. A faction of the military tried to overthrow the government, killing 250 people. Immediately after, the government declared a state of emergency, but the instability cost Turkey much of the foreign investment that it needed. In the meantime, Turkey was still fighting the PKK terror group in the east, and while that all went on, the lira kept falling. Earlier this year, the government called elections for June 24. It would be the first election under a presidential system, rather one based on a parliament. Recep Tayyip Erdogan won the presidential vote. He has now appointed Berat Albayrak, who was energy minister in the last cabinet, as a new finance minister. With annual inflation hovering above 15% and current account deficit widening sharply, Albayrak, a PhD in finance, faces a tough task. Aware of the challenges, he says the priority is to attract foreign investors.
This new era will herald strong economic growth and swift decision-making. We will see that the interest of foreign companies will grow in our country.
But for that, he will not only need to manage the economic challenges, but will also need to change the global investor perception, which might be an even tougher task. Ömer Kablan, Straight Talk.
So, are international markets and investors hedging against the Turkish economy for political reasons rather than economic ones? To discuss this, joining me now in the studio are Selva Demiralp, who is a professor of economics here at Koç University, and Taha Arvaz, who is a financial commentator and columnist with the Daily Sabah. Welcome to the both of you to Straight Talk. Good to have you on. Selva, let me start with you. For the better part of the last decade, Turkey has been able to post some impressive growth numbers. Yet when you look at the current economic picture, is it fair to say that the alarm bells are going off for the Turkish economy?
I think it's partly true, because for an economy to grow at a healthy rate, that's the potential GDP, potential growth rate. For Turkey, that's around 5.5% growth. Now, for the last 3 quarters, we have been growing faster than that rate, like 7.5, 11%, and last it was 7.4. Now, people might ask this question, what is wrong with growing faster than 5.5? The issue is, if you are forcing your productive capacity, which is what we call overheating in economics, it's going to generate inflationary pressures. So you can think of this like a self-correcting mechanism. Like if you're running faster than your average speed, your heart rate increases to slow you down. That's what's happening in Turkish economy right now. When you grow faster than your optimal 5.5% capacity, inflation rate starts to increase. And for an economy like Turkey, which needs external borrowing in order to finance its growth, current account deficit and private sector debt goes up, which is reflected in the depreciation in the Turkish lira. Now, both of these channels, both the exchange rate channel as well as the inflation rate, is increasing cost of borrowing, which is slowing the economy down. So right now, the issue is, yes, if you grow faster, you are going to slow down back to your 5.5%. The issue is it going to be a slow landing or is it going to be a hard landing?
There is going to be a landing of some sort. And this is actually sort of brought out into the sentiment from the international markets. President Erdogan has often accused market makers of sort of unfairly painting a gloomy picture for the Turkish economy. Do you think that there is a bias against President Recep Tayyip Erdogan, especially after the elections?
You know, that's really not very clear in that investors ultimately want to make money. So if there's someone who is betting against the Turkish economy and they have a vested interest in it going down, you're short bonds, for example, that's possible. But if you don't have a vested interest and you just don't like the current environment and you want someone else to be empowered that will help you make more money, then you lobby for that. I mean, it's people do or speak whatever they feel is in their best interest, in my perspective. So the question is really what's in Turkey's best interest? What's Turkey doing about that? And I would just add to what Professor Salva said a second ago. It's not just Turkey that's in trouble. I mean, the entire world. There is no one currency in the entire world that is appreciated against the US dollar. So when we talk about Turkey's currency decreasing or devaluing against the US dollar, that's right, but so has the Canadian dollar, so has the Brazilian real, so has the euro, so has even the Japanese yen. Gold is down 13% on the year. So there's a global economic storm brewing, and Turkey is just one of many people caught up in it.
So you're saying it's also partly because of a stronger dollar and tightening
liquidity
out there that most emerging markets are actually feeling this crunch.
Not only emerging markets, like Sweden is down 8% on the year. You know, Sweden is hardly an emerging market.
Salva, let me turn to you. How does Turkey weather through the storm?
So what we need to do, I mean, if you look at, for example, what Fitch said or S&P said when they downgraded Turkey, the report is almost identical. They try to understand the following. Do you acknowledge the fact that you have been overheating, and are you going to slow down this economy? So they need to see messages, and we have seen this in the pre-election era from Mehmet Şimşek, for example, that we are going to slow this economy down. We are aware of the problem. We are going to slow down, which is possible with tight monetary policy by the Central Bank of Turkey. And at the same time, in order to avoid a sudden landing as opposed to a soft landing, we need to still stimulate the investment sector, like provide subsidies, try to attract foreign currency like we did in 2002 to 2006 period. During that time, we had high interest rates, and yet foreign direct investment was attracted into Turkey because we had an agenda for structural reforms.
Okay. Do you think that, Salva talked about Mehmet Şimşek, a previous minister that was well liked by the markets. Do you think that the appointment of the president's son-in-law, he does hold a PhD in finance, he does come from an experienced corporate executive background, he's actually successfully led a previous ministry as well. Has that sort of tainted the image of Turkey as well, or the outlook on Turkey?
I mean, that's what the press reports have said. You know, it's very... I've heard this a lot in a lot of New York Times articles, et cetera, Bloomberg. And this is coincidentally the 50th anniversary of RFK's assassination. I've listened to RFK, Robert Kennedy's documentary recently, and there's this one scene where he's the only guy in the room who's against thermonuclear war in Cuba. So yes, he's the brother of the president. Yes,
son-in-law.
No, the brother, Robert Kennedy. He's the brother of John F. Kennedy. And you know, 6 years later, they passed an anti-nepotism law, which bars people from getting paid. So Jared Kushner, for example, also the son-in-law of President Trump, is there. But it doesn't necessarily mean that he's appointed this guy, the son-in-law is the minister, frankly, because he can't find a job somewhere else. It's because he trusts him. And the fact of the matter is, this is what happens in democracies. People vote for someone, and then if you trust them, they appoint ministers, and the Congress the Parliament can overrule, if need be, these type of appointments. So the question is really, I mean, if it's a question of, we shouldn't have a democracy, that's a different debate, but I don't think it's right for Turkey to say, we're going to let foreign investors choose our ministers. It's possible that they have good input into who they should be, and that's a fair point. But it's important to note that this is a democracy. Elections happened, and this is what we ended up with.
That is a fair point. Let me ask you another question. The president is under pressure by a lot of economics to sort of hike interest rates. President Erdogan has said high rates are the mother of all evil. Does seem to be some sort of missing in between
right.
in terms of the message that wants to be given. Put that out there. Clarify that for us.
The short answer is, we don't know if increasing interest rates will actually help the Turkish lira. It's already gone up 500 basis points in the last 4 or 5 months, and that hasn't done a lot to help it. More importantly than raising interest rates are all these turmoil, all this global turmoil that's going along. I mean, President Trump and Vladimir Putin just had this bizarre press conference this week, as you may know. And there's trade wars going all around the world. The European Union is saying we can no longer depend on the United States. There's turmoil in Syria. I mean, there's a war going on, and we're talking about, what type of tea do you want to drink? Mm-hmm. Obviously, I'm not dismissing the importance of raising interest rates, et cetera, but there is a limit. I mean, I've heard economists say you have to raise interest rates, you have to raise interest rates. Till when? There is a breaking point where the economy can no longer take that. Are we there yet? I don't know, but we'll see.
It sounds much easier than actually, it's a very complicated science, but Seva Demiralp and Tavars, thank you very much for joining us here on Straight Talk.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It's $1 million industry, and in Turkey, nearly all lavender production comes from one tiny village in the western part of the country, a village where women play a lead role and have literally grown a tourist destination from the ground up with their own hands. Abdul Halim traveled to Kuyucak to visit Turkey's lavender village.
Huriye Tezcan doesn't mind getting her hands dirty, but she rarely gets a chance to stop and smell the lavender. She knows it's her moneymaker. Like Tezcan, her entire village depends on the flowering plant for a living.
Lavender has changed our lives completely. We produce all sorts of lavender products: water, oil, cream, cologne, jam, ice cream, shower gel, you name it. Before, we used to only sell lavender itself, but once we started producing lavender products, we started making money.
Lavender has been grown in Kuyucak for decades, but it's only been 3 years since the village started becoming a tourist destination, thanks to the efforts of these women. The remote village is nearly 50 kilometers away from Isparta, traditionally known as the City of Roses, so the odds were stacked against them.
There was a time during the project when the women lost their confidence. People around them were saying that they won't succeed no matter how hard they work. This was demoralizing. Then we took them to Bursa, where women were contributing to their village and city with their own projects. It was a very good example for them.
After returning, 17 women formed a cooperative and began working on the Lavender Village project. Kuyucak now accounts for 93% of Turkey's lavender production. As lavender grew, so did a sense of pride. Now a hotspot for bloggers and photographers, the village went from 0 tourists 2 years ago to 140,000 last year.
We wanted our women to contribute to our economy. They were already contributing, but their names were not heard. In every job, we have women in the background. Why don't we have them in forefront? That's why we established this cooperative.
The hope is these lavender fields not only grow as a tourism draw for the Turkish countryside, but more importantly, a livelihood continues to bloom for the village's economically disadvantaged women. The the women's initiative has had a domino effect throughout the community. Many businesses are thriving.
Our life became more exciting and filled with color, literally. Before, we'd get bored easily, but now, brides, grooms and musicians take photos and videos in my field. I'm so happy. We are proud we made our voices heard through Lavender.
A sentiment echoed across the village.
If there was no lavender, we would not own anything. We would not do anything. Lavender gave us capital.
And a blossoming business. Adil Halim, Straight Talk, Kuyacak, Isparta.
That's all for this edition of Straight Talk with me, Ali Can Aynar. If you've got any comments or suggestions, please do share them with us on Twitter with #StraightTalk. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Until next time, take care and goodbye.